All right, you beautiful humans. Before we dive in today, I really want to address something. So if you're a boomer or Gen X and you're watching this and your first instinct is to comment, well, kids these days just don't want to work, I really need you to stick around for these next several minutes. And if you're Gen Z and you're tired of being told that you're lazy when you've submitted 500 applications and you've gotten 5 interviews with 0 job offers, this video is also for you. And I want to provide a balanced perspective from a Gen X point of view with 3 of my own Gen Z kids. And today we're actually going to be talking about why Gen Z is facing the worst job market in over a decade. And the data is showing that work ethic is not the issue in all of these cases. So if you feel like jumping to my actionable steps, please feel free and do so. But for context, let's actually start with some of the hard data that should make everyone feel uncomfortable. So here's a stat that represents a historic first. So for the first time ever, the unemployment rate among recent college graduates has exceeded the national unemployment rate. And that is ballooning to over 6.6% over the past 12 months. And think about that for a second. As one Oxford economics expert put it, this goes against what you would expect. Those with higher educational attainment usually have better employment prospects than those with less educational attainment. And we're witnessing a complete reversal of how the job market has worked for generations. 80% of Gen Z professionals in white-collar roles report difficulty finding better job prospects. But let's talk about what each generation actually experienced when they entered the workforce, because understanding this context, I think, is actually crucial. So boomers entered the workforce during America's post-World War II economic expansion. The US controlled 70% of the world's gold reserves. Wages increased 60% during the war, and when they started their careers, companies filled 85% of positions internally through promotions and training. But here's what we often forget. So boomers actually grew up under constant psychological pressure. There was the Cold War, nuclear annihilation fears, and rapid social change that created what psychologists called a pervasive fear of life among children. Their parents that were traumatized by the Depression and World War II shifted from strict discipline to what researchers described as permissive parenting, so essentially trying to solve their own trauma through their children. And Gen X entered during the outsourcing boom and Reagan's ideological shift. This is actually when America moved from we're all in this together to you're on your own. And this goes beyond my generation being feral, and we were latchkey kids and truly out there on our own. But Reagan's policies redefined prosperity as individual achievement rather than collective support, and Gen X was the first generation to fully experience this new reality. They watched manufacturing jobs disappear overseas while being told that they deserve better jobs, even though many of those better jobs were just lower wage service work with fancier titles. Now, millennials, they were actually sold the ultimate lie. Just go to college, get good grades, and you'll have a great career. They did everything that they were told to do, then graduated into the 2008 recession, and many are still paying for degrees that still haven't delivered on the promised returns. But here is the key difference. All of these previous generations still had a job market that, despite its flaws, eventually created opportunities. The system was changing, but it still functionally worked for most people who persisted. Now let's talk about Gen Z and what they're actually facing, because it's unprecedented in modern history. First, let's actually talk about the ghost jobs. So these are the job postings companies never intend to fill. And no, this isn't just a few bad actors. According to recent surveys, 40% of companies posted fake job listings in 2024. 30% of current job listings are ghost jobs, and only 4 out of 10 job postings now result in a hire, and this is down from 8 out of 10 in 2019. But the reasons companies do this is what should really piss you off. 66% post ghost jobs just to make it appear that the company is doing better than it actually is. 77% report increased productivity among existing workers because they're scared of losing their jobs. And then 60% just want to collect resumes for later, whether that's data mining or just to kind of have around for other purposes. But here is the kicker. 70% of hiring managers apparently believe that this practice is morally acceptable. Imagine spending 30 minutes crafting a cover letter for a job, and I know cover letters, whether they're relevant today or not, but let's just kind of stick with it here. But for a job that was never real in the first place, multiply that by hundreds of applications. And second, the impossible experience requirement. So research actually shows that over 51% of entry-level jobs require prior work experience, with an average of 2.7 years of experience required just to get your foot in the door. And here's the thing, my friends. I am really good at my job. I have owned businesses, I've hired, I've built teams, and I will say that as much as I love working, and I don't see a slowdown for me anytime soon, because honestly, retirement is just not an end goal for me, but it will continue to evolve and look different. However, my point here is that I want to make sure that the younger generation coming up gets the best parts of me and my skills, because that torch will eventually be passed. I need them to have those A-game skills when they start to run things. And here's the thing, I'm going back to my roots of punk rock and metal and railing against the system. And I realized that we did eventually grow up and had to play in the sandbox, but we can actually do that without throwing sand. But what I mean here is that we have got to do better. And as I tell my own kids, whether it seems fair or not, life is going to punch you in the mouth. Yes, it will. But being able to get back up and learning how to pivot is something I am trying to teach. Now, third, there's AI displacement. And this is where things get really concerning. So experts predict that AI disruption could last up to 15 years, and this can be bigger than the introduction of the internet. We are not talking about some distant future. Companies are eliminating what researchers call formative entry-level jobs right now, handing that work over to AI. So let me put a face on this. Michael Macaluso, he's 22 years old. He just earned his mechanical engineering degree from the University of Connecticut. And despite applying for nearly 200 positions, he is back working at his hometown pool this summer. And as he put it, I was told by a lot of people that I was going to get a job right out of college, and then all of a sudden, there are no jobs. Michael's story isn't unique, and AI could eliminate up to 50% of entry-level jobs within the next 5 years. And almost 78,000 jobs have been eliminated by AI in 2025 alone. But here's what is really unnerving. Entry-level jobs have always been the training ground where people learn work skills, professional behavior, and industry knowledge. If AI eliminates these positions, where exactly is this next generation supposed to gain experience? AI has a potential to either augment or maybe totally replace jobs that are physically or cognitively repetitive. These jobs are not only done by entry-level people, there are certain people who do repetitive things for all of their lives. Those jobs are in jeopardy. But fourth, companies have largely abandoned training programs, and unlike previous generations who were hired for potential and then trained on the job, today's employers want workers who hit the ground running immediately. The US spends less than 0.1% of GDP on active labor market programs like job training, while most developed nations spend 0.6%. Now, one commenter perfectly captured this, and I see this in a lot of the videos. So for the boomer, oh, you got a pulse and a high school diploma? Welcome aboard. If you work hard next year, you'll be manager. Versus now, you've got a master's degree, you've got certifications, 3 years of experience. Sorry, for our junior positions, we need someone with 5 years of experience. But let's actually talk about wages, because this is where the generational divide really shows and where the just work harder advice completely breaks down. So if minimum wage had kept pace with productivity since 1968, it would be $21.50 per hour today, not $7.25. And I know that there are many states that have implemented a higher minimum wage than this, and it's like a starting point. But we also need to discuss that since 1979, this is the most important thing, is that productivity has grown 74%, while wages for typical workers have only grown 9%. What this actually means is that roughly 50% of full-time American workers are effectively making less than what minimum wage should be if it had remained tied to productivity. So we're not talking about people being lazy, we're talking about the fundamental relationship between work and reward being broken. But here's a reality that Gen Z faces. They're paying 31% more for housing than millennials did at the same age, 46% more for health insurance, over twice as much for car insurance, and we are all feeling that one. But they are projected to spend $145,000 in rent by age 30 compared to $126,000 for millennials. And they're doing this while earning wages that have essentially been stagnant for 45 years. So this actually brings us to why the traditional advice isn't just inadequate, it's often counterproductive, especially as we start seeing that separation of executive and CEO level compensation and profit sharing, and that divide continues to just widen. Gen Z isn't lazy. The data shows that nearly half are working 3 or more jobs just to survive, and 72% live paycheck to paycheck. And I see in the comments about this generation and their cars with the sunroofs and the leather seats, talking about how they can't get jobs and they can't afford stuff, and they're probably living above their means. And for some, that actually might be the case. But I see this even in my own generation of that lifestyle creep. But we can't say with absolute certainty that this car wasn't handed down from a parent, just like I can't assume that a neighbor that has a new boat in the driveway in Colorado and may be overextended in financing this purchase for the next 20 years. But what I do know is that the system has fundamentally changed. When older generations entered the workforce, job postings were real, companies invested in training, and a firm handshake could actually get you hired. Loyalty was also rewarded with advancement. But today, 40% of those job postings are fake. Companies expect immediate productivity, and human connections matter more than ever, but they're harder to make. And here's the thing, job hopping is often the only way to get significant raises. And this one is so mind-boggling to me that a company is so focused on their current quarter rather than seeing the ongoing hemorrhaging of cash to continue to hire. But here's what we don't talk about enough, the psychological impact. One study actually found that long periods of unemployment can reduce lifetime income by 2%, but the mental health effects are definitely immediate. When you apply to hundreds of jobs and get 5 interviews that lead nowhere, and when you're told you need experience to get experience, when you're competing against AI for entry-level work, that is not a character flaw, that is a systemic failure. So what can you actually do? Because understanding the problem is only half the battle. So for Gen Z job seekers, prioritize human connections over online applications. I personally know many professionals out there that haven't gotten a job through an online application platform in recent years. Every position has come through networking. The data backs this up. Networking leads to significantly higher success rates. This is just a reality to know someone or know someone who knows someone. Focus on skills over credentials. Build portfolios, contribute to projects, create content that shows what you can do. In a world where 70% of hiring managers post fake jobs, being able to prove your value becomes crucial. And consider alternative pathways very seriously, because I do see comments mentioning skilled trades, and they're right. Many trade jobs, not all, but many jobs pay better than college required positions. And again, many, not all, can't be outsourced or automated. And I know that this might not seem like the pivot that you're looking for if you've already gone to college, but skilled trades are not less than. And if you haven't pursued college yet, really give it some hard thought here. And then mastering AI tools and focusing on lifelong learning for everyone. Since AI displacement is happening, whether we like it or not, the goal isn't to compete against AI, but to innovate alongside it. As one university president put it, we don't try to teach our students skills, we try to teach students a way to learn on their own for the rest of their lives. This approach, learning how to learn, becomes crucial when the job market is changing this rapidly. And leverage those internships and networking aggressively. One recent computer science graduate did an internship with Verizon as a sophomore, and the company hired her full time. And as she noted, something that is really important with entry-level jobs is the networking and the opportunities that you make from it. In a world of ghost jobs, human connections become even more valuable. But for older generations in positions of influence, we have to use our networks actively. If you're in a hiring position, remember that you likely got opportunities through connections too, and we need to be paying it forward. And of course, advocating within your companies for realistic entry-level requirements and actual training programs. Push back against the experience paradox. So for everyone, when we support legislation addressing ghost jobs, so several states are actually working on bills to make this practice illegal. This affects everyone. Pushing for transparency in hiring, so companies should be posting real salary ranges and honest experience requirements. And I know in Colorado that the salary range is required to be listed. And then of course, stopping the generational blame game. As one wise commenter has noted, at some point, we have to realize that we're just human beings, and I don't understand why we look at ourselves as the enemy. But here's what we need to understand. This isn't really about generational warfare, even though it feels like it sometimes. It's about a system that has been gradually redesigned over decades to extract maximum value while providing minimum opportunity. The solution isn't to blame each other or compete over who had it worse. The solution is to recognize that the old playbook doesn't work anymore, and we need to write a new one together. This generation isn't failing to adapt. They're trying to succeed in an economy that has been systematically designed to make success harder to achieve. But here's what gives me hope. I do see Gen Z creating alternative paths. They're building communities, using technology creatively, and refusing to accept that this is just how things are. They're not just adapting to a broken system, they're working to build a better one. So the question isn't whether Gen Z will figure it out. They're already doing that in ways previous generations don't always recognize. The question is whether those of us with power and influence will help fix the underlying systems before we waste an entire generation's potential. And I would love to know what you think. Have you experienced the ghost job phenomenon or impossible entry-level requirements? How are you navigating this landscape? And let me know in the comments below. And please, let's keep this conversation constructive. We need these discussions across generational lines. And if this video helped you understand the bigger picture, please share it, especially with people from different generations. We are all in this together, whether we realize this or not. And as always, I appreciate your time here, and I will catch you right back here on your next level up.